Hey, everybody, this is Brian Beckham, and I have got the Reverend Hunt Priest. Hunt, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thank you. I'm doing great. It's good to be with
I,
you.
I can't tell you how much, how excited I am to have this conversation with you. I've been following you on Twitter and some other places, and you kind of encapsulate some of the things that me and a lot of other people, including some very close friends of mine, are absolutely captivated with, and that is kind of the intersection of spirituality, religion, psychedelics, consciousness, and all those different things, and how it seems that there may be some connection between those. So, for example, I know you were part of the psychedelic trials at Johns Hopkins, and I don't know if you were a part of this particular trial, but in some of those trials, what they found is it actually with people that were tended towards atheism, in general, after going through the John Hopkins experiments, became more religious. People that were already religious uh, became even more rooted in their faith. And so I think there's this kind of cultural baggage that we have behind, quote, drugs that maybe clouds some of the potential benefits of psychedelics. Before we get into that, though, Hunt, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you got to where you are today.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Oh man, yes, I can't wait to dig into the conversations, all the topics you mentioned. In I live in Savannah, Georgia now, but in 2015, I lived in Seattle, and I was flipping through a magazine in the fall of 2015, flipping through a magazine called the Christian Century, which is sort of a progressive Protestant. At that time, I think it was twice a month, and flipping through there and saw an ad for a research study at Hopkins and NYU. They were looking for religious professionals of all traditions who were both involved in some religious vocation in some institution and were psychedelically naive. So I fit both of those categories. I was 51 years old at the time, and I thought, Johns Hopkins cares what a Episcopal priest or anybody else thinks about anything. I'm in, and I knew a little bit about the mental health research they were doing, a little bit about that, and I'd always had an interest of the intersection between spirituality and religion and mental health. But mostly, I just saw that ad as an adventure, and thought it would be important to be part of some medical research around spirituality, and healing. So I signed up for it thinking I wouldn't get in because who wouldn't want to do that? There'll be 1,000 people that want to do it.
Yeah.
It took them about 8 years to fill it up. They couldn't find rabbis who were psychedelically naive. So that's its own. So it's mostly the Christians that are uptight about, well, Buddhists
Yeah.
and are too, but the Jewish community is not so uptight about psychedelics as we are. But they had a hard time finding rabbis who were psychedelically naive, and they had a hard time finding Christian clergy who were be willing to do it, either because they worked with psychedelics when they were younger or didn't want any part of it. Or this was before Michael Pollan. This was 2015. It was before How to Change Your Mind came out. And I'd been around psychedelics some in college in my 20s, but I just wasn't that interested in it. And as a thing to do, I was curious, but it wasn't something I. So anyway, I was 51, saw the ad, applied, accepted. 2 months later, I'm back at Hopkins on the sofa with two guides, and what that study was, I think, a result of the question you had at the beginning of, or the observation you had at the beginning was people were having these profound religious and spiritual experiences in the mental health study, and they brought us in as religious professionals, people that have dedicated our vocation, a lot of study and practice to our religious tradition. So they brought us in, used the same protocol, so which is a medium high dose of psilocybin a month apart, and then tracked for 16 months with interviews and just to see how we were doing and what was coming up. And it changed it changed so much about my life. I knew after that first session when I had a huge experience, what I think was a Pentecostal experience, uh, it was definitely an experience of the Holy Spirit, so that makes it a Pentecostal experience. And I knew that it would change my work. I didn't know how. I was serving a parish in Seattle then, and right after that, or after I was in the study, I decided with my family, and I decided it was time to come back to the Southeast, which were where we were from, and I did with a lot of clarity. And it took me about 5 years. I came accepted a position at a church here in Savannah, and spent about 5 years thinking, should I go be trained as a facilitator? Should I be a chaplain? Should I just keep doing what I'm doing and be ready to talk about it when the time comes? And I weighed all those. In the middle of pandemic and fall of 2019, I went on a retreat in the desert with some friends, just a spiritual retreat. And really over the course of those days, realized there needed to be some place for Christians to talk about psychedelics and the psychedelic community to be more aware of really the beautiful best parts of Christianity around mystical experience and consciousness expansion and Jesus as a healer and the role of the church in healing and the intersection between mental health and spiritual health, which I think if the churches were fully doing their job as a place for people to get well, I'm not sure we'd need as many therapists as we do. But I think the church abdicated a lot of our responsibility to the professional clinicians when we had healthy community can solve a lot of problems, a healthy spiritual community. And we don't have a lot of those, sadly. So
Yeah.
anyway, that was a long answer, but it was over the course of that time between the study in early 16 and the summer of 21 when I started Ligare as a response to this calling I had to get the conversation started within Christianity and to take the healing seriously. That's really where I think this most applies to Christianity is Jesus was a healer. The church for centuries built hospitals and trained nurses and doctors and really took healthcare seriously and mental health care in some quarters seriously. And I think that's there's a ministry for the church in this, and it's around this intersection of health and healing and spiritual wholeness, which I think psychedelics is we know is can be very helpful for.
That's a great story, and, there's a bunch of things you said in there that I kinda wanna follow up on. You know, one of the things that is interesting to me is there is actually some evidence that the early church had psychedelics. There's evidence that the Greeks, the Delphic oracles, part of that experience was a psychedelic experience, at least a light psychedelic experience. I think the Jewish tradition has a history of experimenting with psychedelics. There's a there's a history in American Buddhism, it seems like, of people going to India, having acid trips, and then going to see the Bodhisattva tree and stuff like that. But people don't realize, and I think part of it might be a little bit of the American branch of evangelical Christianity, or at least some of it tends to be very anti-drug or very anti-mind-altering substance. Like, for example, the Southern Baptist and the Mormons and stuff don't like alcohol and things like that. Although there's a funny joke about the Southern Baptists. They don't drink in front of other Southern Baptists.
They don't speak to each other in the
Yeah.
liquor store.
Yeah, they
But which is
yeah.
true and funny and sort of a character. But the thing they say about Episcopalians is wherever there's a fourth, there's a fifth, which is the other side. That's problematic too. It's like we finding something in between of total abstinence and total reckless drinking is there's
Yeah.
probably something in between that. So
It's usually the middle path. That's what I tell people. It's usually the moderate path. My grandfather, the thing that he was best at is he was very moderate about everything. He just had a very his entire philosophy is one of moderation.
yeah,
But in any event, there is a historical tradition of using mind-altering substances for spiritual purposes, and I think what happened was, if my history is right, we kind of got away from that when Nixon became president, and there was this decision made that we were going to have the war on drugs, which just kind of covered everything. In fact, Cary Grant, Larry Hagman, a bunch of famous movie stars had used LSD in therapeutic settings.
oh yeah,
Steve Jobs said using LSD in India, one of the founders of Apple, is one of the most profound things that he had ever done, top 2 or 3 things he had ever done in your life. Let me ask you, because I'm super duper curious. I've never done personally a medium to high dose psilocybin trip. You did one in a clinical setting at Johns Hopkins where they have people that are actually observing you in case things go wrong. I assume you probably were wearing an eye mask and maybe had certain kind of music. What was it? What was it like? If and I've heard it's hard to put into words. It's a little ineffable, but do your best to describe what your first experience was like what it showed you, what it taught you.
Well, so I told the story about seeing the article in the Christian Century, which was a big pivot point for me. But a year before that, I'd been on sabbatical. I'd had a 3-month sabbatical. At the very end of my sabbatical, I went to a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat because I'd done I is for most of my life tried to have a meditation practice. I'd gone on pilgrimages. I'd done a lot of leading groups in Bible study and done a lot of retreats myself and with other people. So that was just part of who I kind of was. And I went on this 10-day Vipassana retreat, which is a very intense. I don't for those that aren't, it's like 6 hours in a meditation hall every day for 10 days. And for the first few days, you just notice the breath across your nostrils for the first couple days. And it was very difficult, and, there were a couple times you sign a contract that you won't leave, and there were a couple times I thought, "I gotta get out of here because 'cause I'm going bonkers." But I stuck with it, and on the 4th day this is an important part of this story. So, on the 4th day, 4th or 5th day of that retreat, I felt this very significant electrical current in my left thigh, this circular feeling of electrical current spinning around in my left thigh, top of my left thigh. And I was in this meditation. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what that is, but I guess I quieted down enough and I'm sensing my body. And that just felt huge. It felt so big. And I left the retreat and tried to stick with that practice, which is an hour of meditation in the morning and the afternoon. And it just didn't quite lock in for me. And I really forgot about that little electrical thing on my thigh. So I'm at Hopkins. I'm about an hour and a half in. I'm seeing beautiful lights and colors and this like purple smoke and green. It's just beautiful. And I'm kind of in awe of it. I've got the eye shades on and the earphones. And then all of a sudden I'd totally forgotten about it. I feel that same little electrical spiral in my left thigh, same place, same degree of sensation.
Mm.
Oh shit! I literally thought to myself, "Oh shit!" 4 days into that meditation retreat, I had that experience, and then an hour and a half into this, I'm having the exact same. And in my, well, psilocybin, you're altered for sure. You can get up and go to the bathroom, but you're not. I mean, you shouldn't drive, and things just don't quite line up. But in my mind, I thought, "Oh my god, the it gave it such legitimacy that it took me 4 days in a meditation retreat to get to the same place." So at that point, I really just gave myself over to the experience, which is what happened. And almost immediately, I got this very strong feeling of electrical current in my spine, at the base of my spine. It was going up my spine. It was really strong, and it got right here, and it stopped. And I just felt blocked. I felt like the current was blocked. And at one point, I thought this is going to come out of me through my ears, or it's going to blow my Adam's apple open. And I was very agitated. And my guides at that point, and this is again, the memories are kind of confused and all over the place, but at some point they touched me on my shoulder, and at that moment, that current that in my spine, it was literally went up it's like somebody pulled the lever and just increased the juice 1,000%, and it blew through this and out the top of my head in my imagination of it. And it was then that I began to make sounds, which I felt like were what we call in Christianity speaking in tongues, which is in more charismatic traditions, is something that people really, I mean, they certainly experience it, but they're much more free to talk about it than Episcopalian typically is. But anyway, I had that experience, and both in the moment and on reflection, I had a completely different understanding of that line from Paul that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. I really understood that in the way that's typically used is to get people to stop smoking or drinking,
Yeah.
but and that's
Yeah.
all that's true. Like, take care of this. It's important to take care of it. But to me, re- in that moment, and even now, almost 10 years later, 9.5 years later, it's like this is where the spirit lives, both here and around me. It's connecting us right now, and it pulled the spirit pulled us together to have this conversation. I think so. And I think it's in the psychedelic experience where my critical thinking brain and my doubting brain and my less than imaginative brain gets shut down, and all these new connections started happening for me, and that was one of the connections. And so a lot came out of that experience, but I really began to understand that in my preaching and teaching, my voice I'd sort of lost. I had a block. What I call a chakra, throat chakra block. Now I didn't have that language, but then, but this was blocked, and I wasn't able to really speak my truth. I was in, I just couldn't really always say what I really thought or believed in a congregation that was politically mixed, theologically mixed, and just you just have to be careful, or I thought you did. So you did have to be careful. You don't want to offend people. But it was that experience that I realized that so much of my work had felt like it was locking me down. And that was self-imposed. Nobody told me not to say things, but it was self-imposed. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. And the other breakthrough was for me was that my body, all of our bodies tell us everything we need to know. And I think most Western people, and I certainly got this, just think everything is up here. Everything we experience, we filter through our brains, and our bodies are equally as important, if not more. I mean, God came in Christian theology, God came to rest in the human person and rests in us. And the human experience and the human body is that's one of the places that God lives and communicates to us through our body. So we've got a skewed part of the Protestant problem is we've got this skewed idea of the body that it gets us in trouble. And it can, but so can our brains get us in
Yeah.
trouble. And it's finding the balance. Our bodies can be trusted. For some reason, we've got this idea that they can't because we're kind of American Christianity's got this puritanical side to it. And
Yeah.
we think sex is bad but our body keeps the score and it tells us everything we need to know. And so the two big takeaways for me, that was a big takeaway for me was start paying attention to your body because I used to. And what your body is, trust your body to tell you what you need to know. So I'm gotten better about taking a breath. And when I feel like I'm in a stuck place, like, all right, what's my body telling me? Not just my logical brain, but what's my body telling me?
What's so interesting to me about what you just said is, I've been thinking a lot for the last 5 or 6 years about exactly what you said, like this feeling in your stomach when you're about to make a bad decision, or when you're about to make a good decision, or when you're in a place at night and it's dark and there's no lights and you got to stop and maybe it's not the safest place and you get the cooties or whatever you feel in your stomach. There's a famous author, I forget his name, but he's a security expert. He provides security for heads of state and Jeff Bezos and people like that. And one of the big things he said in his book, I'll never forget this, is if something feels off, you need to trust your gut. You need to trust your instinct. Like there's a reason that your body feels that way. But you're right, Hunt. I think most people trust their all these electrical signals that are going on in the upper regions of their head as opposed to the electrical signals that are going in the lower regions, like your stomach and your
Yeah.
sensations and stuff like that. And I frankly don't think there's any difference between the electrical impulses that happen above your eyeballs and the electrical impulses that happen below your eyeballs. In fact, you talk about meditation. I started meditating seriously about 15 years ago, and I've never done a high dose of psilocybin, but I have microdosed it. And one of the super cool things that I discovered is if I was microdosing psilocybin when I did my meditation, it was effortless. It was deeper. It was like a complimentary experience. Like I didn't have to try to focus. I didn't have to try to concentrate. You talk about Vipassana meditation. For people that aren't familiar with Vipassana, that is a very trying, especially your first time, uh, all day, every single day, and it can vary in length, but usually it's about 10 days. It can be 2 months, 3 months. But imagine just sitting there with your legs crossed for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, doing nothing but focusing
Scanning
on your
scanning
breath,
your body and noticing your breath.
scanning your body the whole time. What a unbelievably, and I had a, this is going to sound silly, but about 5 years ago, I took my cell phone, my iPad, my laptop, and I went on vacation with my family and I stuck everything in the safe for 4 days. And for 2 days, it was terrible, just like the first 2 days of a Vipassana
Withdrawal, it's
meditation.
like withdrawal.
It's like I was having withdrawal, but then all of a sudden, I could literally physically feel like my brain, the muscle was like relaxing and releasing, and I had an entirely different conscious experience the last few days of vacation, which is, I think, what you get with meditation, and also with psychedelics. So in many ways, meditation and psychedelics, I think, are very complementary processes. What was the reaction, as an Episcopalian Episcopal priest? What was the reaction when you started talking about psychedelics, of your parishioners and some of the people you
Well,
dealt with?
I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it. I
Yeah.
my then wife and a few friends, I didn't this was 2016, and, it just didn't feel, like, safe, and, one of my good friends was in the study with me, so I talked to him a lot, and because we were part of a medical because of HIPAA and research, we didn't know who else was in the study, I just knew my friend was in it, and so he and I talked, and a lot, and shared experiences, but, I didn't talk very much about it at all, and then Pollan's article came out in the How to Change Your Mind came out in 2018. I talked a little bit more about it, but I didn't really tell many people at all until I decided to resign the position I was in the church here in Savannah and started Ligare, and then I had to. It was almost like I
Yeah.
was forced, and so then I started talking about it, and, yeah, it was a big leap because I didn't know, and
What inspired you ultimately to start Ligari?
I think because I've been given this incredible gift, it was so helpful for me, and this is what clergy and other helping professions do. When we have an experience, we want other people to have access to it, and, I'd gotten to work with the world's leading researchers in a safe I was at Johns Hopkins Hospital, I had a prescription for psilocybin, I was working with the best people that in the field, I was in a clinical setting and had 2 profound religious and spiritual experiences. So I knew on some level that if you set the stage differently, if the setting were actually in a religious setting or, some acknowledgement of spirituality, good Lord, what could happen then? So,
Yeah.
uh and I'd led enough retreats and taken groups of people on pilgrimages. I know what can happen in a group setting, and eventually I'd gone out of the country to do ayahuasca, which is a very communal experience. 30 people in a circle, and that felt like a little like church or what church could be. And then I was involved in a peyote ceremony in Mexico, which was very spiritual and very religious and very legal down there. And I saw the intersections of psychedelics and Christianity. Uh, I just saw the parts of Christianity that were so complementary to these experiences. They could hold these experiences for people. People can make meaning of these experiences through the lens of Christian scripture and theology and liturgy and practice. And Christianities, there are many Christianities, and there's all kinds of Christianities. So, just my branch is more sacramental and more liturgical and more formal. So, like, ritual is really important, but say for example, Southern Baptists wouldn't have that same sense of ritual and liturgy, but they have the Bible, which is filled with stories of people having non-ordinary experience, non-ordinary states of most of the Bible is a story of non-ordinary states of consciousness, which are these encounters with God. No one is in a rational, logical, thinking brain place when they come across a burning bush or see the resurrected Jesus or Paul on the road to Damascus. I mean, all of these stories are not ordinary in scripture.
Yeah.
So I think psychedelics, I know it does. Brain research tells us shuts off the part of the brain, the default mode network that tries to keep everything logical and within a box, and that goes away, and then it just opens this expansive. It's like the whole book of Revelation. Whether
Yeah.
it's like so many things can, if you can let your imagination go and your critical thinking brain shut down for a minute or 6 hours or something, amazing things can happen.
What would you s
As it does in meditation. Meditation is the training of your brain to shut the hell up for a minute
It's amazing, like, I've had a no self experience in meditation.
yeah.
Now the problem with that, and what I mean by that is, like, I've had an experience in meditation for people that don't meditate, where basically my ego or my identity, disappeared, and now that happens it was about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Because the second you realize what happened, your ego's back online. So, but what I see in what I see in the Bible, Hunt, a lot of is you talking about mystical experiences, stories of like awe and profundity and stuff that's like, oh my goodness gracious. And I think, as we go about our day-to-day lives, especially as we get older, we get kind of stuck in these ruts of thinking, these kind of habit loops of thinking. And what I think they do is they blind us a little bit to the absolute unbelievable miracle of conscious existence. Like like if you could walk down the street in any city in America today and have an absolutely awe-inspiring experience looking at a tree on the sidewalk if you wanted to. But because our brains are so preoccupied by planning, by worrying, by thinking about the past, by thinking about the future, by protecting this thing we've created called the ego, I think we miss out on some of these awe-inspiring experiences. And I think what psychedelics helps us do, what meditation can help us do, is get rid of these thought loops that we have and kind of see with different eyes, maybe is the way to say it.
I found this to be helpful early on. I think one of the researchers at Hopkins said it's kind of like skiing on fresh powder, where the tracks are, like these ruts that we get. I was in a terrible rut, but I didn't realize how bad it was. But I was in this rut of my spiritual life was kind of dead. I was trying to build up a church. Thought I could just read books and go to conferences and make people do what I said, and the
Yeah.
church would grow. It's like, no, that's not how that works. And people are more attracted to somebody that's more spiritually grounded and doing the work. So I was in such a rut, and you don't realize it when you're in it, but I got a whole maybe the gift, I've not quite thought about this, but probably the biggest gift of those 2 sessions at Hopkins where it allowed me to ski on fresh powder without the tracks. I got
It might have been Michael Pollan's book because I read that book right when it
oh,
came out. Yeah.
maybe it was, I think.
That talks about the snow globe. I remember, I have the analogy that I've heard before, Hunt, was, those little glass globes you can shake up and the snow goes everywhere. The analogy I've heard is imagine your brain as you get older is like a ski mountain and there's these tracks going down the mountain. And then imagine psychedelics are like shaking that globe and all the snow goes everywhere and now you have fresh powder.
Yeah.
That is a great analogy. And I think actually as you grow older, those ruts get deeper and deeper. And if you don't do anything about them, it can get rid of a lot of your conscious agency because you're not actually thinking anymore. You're just kind of repeating these patterns. And again, the more you repeat these patterns, the deeper they get, the more subconscious they get, the more automatic you get. And so whether it's meditation, whether it's prayer, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's journaling, there's something you need to do to make sure that these ruts don't take over everything else. In fact, I would argue, Hunt, that a lot of the reason people get dementia and Alzheimer's earlier than maybe they used to is because they don't do these practices. It's because our brains just get in these loops and these loops get deeper and deeper and deeper. How do you, so I have a very, very good friend, one of my closest friends, who is a brilliant Catholic. I mean, and when I say that, he is a practicing Catholic and he is theologically as smart and as knowledgeable as anybody I know. Anytime I ask him a question from a non-Catholic perspective, he usually has an answer that I've never heard before that it's, oh, wow, that's a great answer. And I've talked to him a little bit about psychedelics and religion. And the context in which I've talked to him about it is, let's say you have somebody that's not religious and and psychedelics could open the door to maybe being more spiritual or religious. Is that appropriate? And he would argue that maybe under the Catholic doctrine, it's not because it's kind of like taking a shortcut, so to speak. And my argument is, what does it matter? Like if the ultimate goal is to develop a relationship with God, what does it matter how you get there?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. That's a
Yeah,
competition work ethic. So, and which I get. I mean, I get it. I do understand a little bit of that. But for one thing, there's grace, and none of this is all. This is a gift. Like I have not worked for any of my spiritual gifts. I've not worked for. They've just been. That's the we talk a lot about grace in Christianity, but don't practice it all the time. But grace, undeserved gift, is what the whole thing is. So there's that. The second is, this is a researcher friend of mine said, "Isn't life hard enough?" So, I mean, especially, I mean, always life's been hard, but we're going. This is a this period in human history is very difficult. We're in huge transitions. We're in huge
yeah.
transitions. I don't think we don't realize how big everything's changing. So it's really a difficult time to try to stay grounded. So if there's a mushroom that can help you stay grounded, why would you not? With the right setting and, making sure you're safe, and there's some people that shouldn't do it. But if you go through all the protocols, and the other thing, and then the other thing, the third thing I would say is, there's a thing called works righteousness in Christianity, which is universally not valued, and that's that it's only worth something if you've worked your butt off for it, and that's
Yeah.
just not what the Christian that's not what the Jewish story is about, or the Christian, or the Muslim story. It's all grace, and we don't deserve any of it. So, yeah, and we need containers. It's I don't I'm not we need to be careful, we need containers. We just shouldn't go do things because we think it's, because we're just on some adventure, although that's good fine too. But these spiritual things need to be done with intention and care, and we also need there's a lot of ruts. And the church, I think a lot of church is in a rut right now. I think a lot of
I
them
think I think you're right.
in a bad
And I
rut,
think
a bad rut.
yeah, I think I think the church in general is in a bad rut. I think if you go to Europe and see all the empty churches, if you look at the statistics, there's like something missing to it.
And
And
people are voting with their feet. It's
people vote with their feet.
it's
That's
not the
right.
people's fault. The church is not, and I, as somebody that's tried for 20 years, it's hard. And there's beautiful things. The world's religions are beautiful, and they're sort of atrophied in some ways.
Yeah.
And just yelling at people and making people feel guilty is not a very good evangelism tool. So, uh,
I tell my kids, so I've got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. My younger boy and my girl are very religious on their own, and I'm very proud of them about it. But I tell them, I say, if you go to church every Sunday and when you walk out the door, you feel like you and everybody you know is going to hell, I mean, I'm not sure that's the
that's a
message.
that is
I'm not
not what Jesus was talking about.
I'm not sure that's the message. I feel like you should walk out and feel like you should feel a sense of joy, you should feel a sense of contentment, you should feel a sense of mission, and anything that can lead you closer to that, I think is in general a positive thing.
In high-stakes litigation, there are no second chances. Complex disputes, powerful opposition, serious consequences. At VB Attorneys, we're built for the biggest legal battles. Our team is focused, relentless, and proven, delivering results when the pressure is highest. When everything's on the line, you need a team that knows how to win. Visit us at vbattorneys.com or call 346-DAMAGED to find out how we can fight for you.
Let me ask you this question. So for many, many years now, I've been saying I wanna do a high dose, supervised psilocybin trip. I want to experience it. And one of the reasons I want to experience it is because I had a very traumatic experience when I was a younger child. My mother got advanced stage breast cancer when I was 5. She lived for 5 years and then died, but it was a horrible, horrible time for her.
And
And so subconsciously,
and
uh,
you,
and
and you.
well, but I didn't realize it at the time is what I'm getting to, Hunt. Like I have my dad, my brother, my 2 closest friends always have been, still are today. And so I didn't feel like I missed anything when I was growing up. But the older I get, subconsciously, like for example, 4 or 5 years ago, I started having panic attacks out of nowhere and I couldn't figure out what was happening. And I think some of this subconscious material had started to kind of manifest itself a little bit. But the point is I'm a little bit, one of the reasons I want to do a high dose of psilocybin under controlled settings is I want to go and examine that experience a little bit and see if it's maybe one of the causes for some of the behaviors I've had in later life, like some of my addictive behaviors. But I'm afraid, quite
Yeah.
frankly. Like, I'm afraid I'm afraid I'm going to go into this deep trip for 4 hours and see things that maybe I don't want to see. So, what do you tell people that want to try an experience like this, but frankly are afraid to try an experience like this?
Yeah. Here, this is a. I don't lead retreats, so but this question comes up a lot, and this is the answer. So if it's somebody that's Christian or some religious Jewish or Christian or Muslim, I would say God. I would say if make sure you physically not make sure there's no reason not to, but then do it and just be very prayerfully know and trust that God. There's no place God does not go with us. And God is always there. God is always there, and God would be there. And let's say you have the most terrifying, most terrific experience, uh, God's going to be there. And for most people, the vast majority of people, even the most difficult experience has real fruit, real meaning, real grist for the mill. And that the healing sometimes the healing comes through coming face to face with our deepest, darkest, saddest stuff.
Yeah.
And, that's what therapy can do, and, but, it takes a long time to get there with therapists and with therapy, and sometimes you never get there. And people say that about psychedelics, it's often like 10 years of therapy in 6 hours or,
Yeah.
some definitely. So I think I know for people that are faithful people that have some Christian orientation, to trust that there's no place God doesn't go with us, and to surround ourselves with prayer, to make sure with people that we trust, and trust that this if it's a mushroom that it's from creation. I mean, God God said it was good, all of it in
Yeah.
Genesis 1. So and you know again, many Christians are afraid of these things, I and that's caution is caution, care, concern, but don't be afraid. You can decide not to do something, but there's no reason to be afraid. I'm just speaking generally, and your concerns are valid because people sometimes discover sexual trauma they weren't aware of, or I remember one time just feeling totally alone in the universe, and it just like for 6 hours just sat with that in a room of people I really cared about, and that was hard. It was painful, and yet that was an important like part of it's like, let's deal with my codependency. Like,
Yeah.
let's deal with the fact that in the end, we come into this world by ourselves and we leave by ourselves. And uh, yeah, I don't know, life's hard. So yeah,
It's crazy. It's crazy because like when I started using nicotine in high school, either Copenhagen or cigarettes or whatever. And I think it was kind of a Freudian reaction to losing my mother, like the oral fixation and,
Mhm.
but it's funny now because I'm confident that if I were to do a high dose psilocybin trip, I would stop using nicotine the next day. Like I'd know. But what I'm afraid of a little bit is I'm going to see like my mom's going to be saying, you don't have to do that anymore. I'm here. And I kind of don't want to give it up because you know what I mean? Like
That's no, that's all.
in some ways, having a cigar at night is part of my identity, and I don't want to lose that part of my identity. So even the crazy thing is, even though I know it would be good for me, and I'm confident it would be good for me, I'm not sure I want. I'm not sure I want that goodness. You know what I mean? And I tell you, you say it's going to be hard, but God will be with you. There's a great saying that I've been using a lot lately as I get older. The cave you fear to enter holds the gold you seek. And so I try to remind myself, like most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the things I'm afraid of, public speaking, taking on certain kind of legal cases, uh, different issues and relationships and things, entering jujitsu tournaments at 52 years old, all those things I'm scared shitless of, right? But those are the best things that I do in
Yeah.
my life. Like the stuff that I'm most afraid of is usually exactly the kind of thing that I should be doing, which is why that I'm so interested in either doing an ayahuasca trip or a psilocybin trip because I'm so scared to do it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of that's probably an indicator that like my ego is trying to protect itself from something it knows that I should do.
And it's not the same thing as we were talking about earlier, that gut feeling like, oh, I shouldn't go into that dark building because there's fear. That's an intuitive sense of danger or something. The
Yeah.
fear is exactly what you're saying.
The fear is going to change me, and I'm afraid to change a little. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
of course.
it's not. You're exactly right. It's not there's something weird going on. This is a bad neighborhood, and I need to be on my P's and Q's. It's the opposite of that, actually. I know this would be helpful. I know this would help change me in a positive way. I know this would probably help me get rid of some of that childhood trauma, but I'm not sure I want that.
Right. Well, I think,
Right.
again, you can go back to scripture, bro. That's an example. Like, uh, most of the people Jesus healed were just resistant, or many of them were resistant to the change that was required of that. So,
Yeah.
Dan is sitting by the pool, and Jesus says, "Get up! Just all you got to do is get up. Like, you've been sitting there all these years. Just stand up and walk, man." And
Yeah.
it's like, well, I think I'll. In his mind, he's like, "Well, this is just a lot easier. Me trying to sit here." But so, yeah, the transformation, changing the hard things in our life require a lot of. There's things we got to give up. And I think that's why a lot of people stay stuck. It's not because we're bad people, or it's just inertia, and it's at least the hell I'm in is a hell I know.
Yeah.
And no, like, just addiction is one example of that. Like, I'm managing it, and it's probably cigars are probably not going to kill me. I mean, I've had my share of nicotine too, and I think a lot of that is just checking us out. I mean, alcohol certainly does that. Checks
Yeah.
us out, deadens our pain. We're self medicating. And in defense of things like smoking, or coffee, there's a beautiful ritual to it.
It's like a sacrament.
Yeah, it's a
It's like that's
sacrament.
like a
It's
sacrament. Yeah.
sacramental, it is. It really is. So it's like, but because of who we are as like, Native Americans consider tobacco a medicine, but
Yeah.
what do? We mass produce it. We fill it up with a bunch of other crap,
Chemicals.
with chemicals, and make it even more addictive. And, instead of just an evening cigar feels healing to me. I mean, I know
Yeah.
problems with it, but so it's just how we consume things. We consume religion like it's a commodity. We consume tobacco like it's a commodity. We consume psychedelic. I mean, there's lots of abuse in psychedelic, not because people are addicted to it, but because people are chasing a high, or chasing, not a high, but chasing an experience. And I think religion's chock full of that. So, uh, people experience junkies. So,
Do you think the Christian church has a role in the conversation that's evolving around psychedelics and spirituality?
God, yes. Oh my God, that's a yes. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Yes, totally. And it's been it's it's been really interesting the last 4 years to say these two things don't go together in your mind, Christianity and psychedelics,
But they do.
but they do.
Really do.
They
And you
really
know what?
do.
And you know what else does, Hunt? Which this is the third piece of this puzzle. Physics
Yes.
and science generally also, I think, is a piece of this puzzle. And I think all of them are kind of converging on the same general idea. And to me, the general idea is what you and I see on a day-to-day basis is just a very, very small part of the story.
Yeah.
Like there's this acknowledgement, there's this kind of blooming enlightenment, I think, whether you come at it from a physics standpoint, whether you come at it from a meditative and a Buddhist standpoint, whether you come at from a spiritual, religious standpoint, a psychedelic standpoint, it's a realization that this immediate experience is just a small, tiny piece of what's actually going on.
Yeah, exactly. And again, not to beat up on American Christianity too much, but 100 years ago, is actually this year, the Scopes monkey trial, but at some point in the West, especially, big parts of Christianity rejected the scientific endeavor. I mean, my tradition didn't, but lots of Christians did. And
Yeah.
that left us in a really so that happened, and there are a lot of Christian theologians who contemporary theologians that take physics and evolutionary biology, other scientific disciplines very seriously.
Very seriously.
The
Yeah.
physics is an
The
important
the
part
the
theological discussion.
the Jesuits in particular have a long and very, very good history of seeing science and religion as complementary,
Yes.
not as enemies. And well, let me ask you, and I know we've been going for almost an hour here, but let me before the show, I told Hannah, I said, I'm trying to go less than an hour, but it's impossible because I have such great guests and we have such great conversations. But let me ask you a little more of a personal question, if you don't mind. How has your work and your experience with psychedelics informed your own personal spiritual practices and beliefs?
So, yeah, that's a thank you for that. So I was 51 when I had the first psychedelic experience. I'd been about 11 years of professional church work and a lifetime of, as a kid and young adult doing involved in church. And I think it was my ordination and then taking on the leadership roles, trying to maintain an institution, which is the role of the clergy partly, that I just got away from my spiritual path in a way. I mean, I was still a practicing Christian, but these things that being out in nature, praying, meditating, just getting out of my brain had been a big part of my spiritual practice. And I've got, like I said, gotten so up in my head about it. And immediately after that first experience, I should have mentioned this earlier. Immediately after that first experience, a huge wad ball of anxiety was gone. It was so much worse than I thought it was before because it was when it was gone, I realized how bad it was. Almost debilitating anxiety. And once that was gone, I just had a fresh sense of it's like it made more room for God. It made more room for my own sense of vocation. I really saw in a way, in many ways, how the work I was doing as a priest was making a difference that I wasn't seeing. And here's a very small example, but I think an important one. In the Episcopal Church and other traditions, when we pray with people, we often put our hands on their head. That's just kind of thing we do. And I did that almost in a perfunctory way. I did it because I thought that's what we did. And I know it's important to touch people, but I just after I had that experience of the guy touching me and this electrical current moving through my body in a much stronger way, I really understood in a new way that by what I would say now is the crown chakra, but that wouldn't be a typical Christian. By praying with somebody and putting my hands here meant something that our ancient ancestors knew that we'd forgotten. That there's
Yeah.
something happens in that there's a transfer of energy, there's a transfer of love and compassion, not just because we feel the other person, but because something actually is happening. That we
Yeah.
kind of back to physics. You can't see it, but we know something's happening. So the my the Eucharist became so much more alive to me as I could sense people in a different way. I was so much more awake and aware and alive and not fearful, not anxious, not worried all the damn time like I was before. I was a mess of worry. I presented well, but it was underneath. I was constantly fretting, and that doesn't go away permanently. But I now can see it in a way that I couldn't see it before. So I had a much deeper appreciation, not just of my work, but the work of religious leaders, the work of the church, what the church can be and do as a community of people doing it together, and that we can support each other's spiritual journeys in a larger community. But each person's story needs to be taken seriously. Like my psychedelic story is my story, and it informs other people's, but that's my experience, and it can be helpful to other people, but I need that validated, and my training as a clergy person helped me validate it because I knew the stories in scripture. I knew that we prayed with people and laid hands on people. I didn't know there was a real anthropological reason for it, but there is, and we don't all these things that we do are some vague memory of a very powerful experience that somebody had at one point. and we
It's amazing how smart humans, I think we sometimes don't give our ancestors enough credit for the intuitive way they understood how things work,
right.
right? They understood which foods go together, which foods are complementary, how touching people in a certain way, how singing in a certain voice or
Yeah.
using a certain rhythm can tap into a certain kind of wave in your
Yes.
brain. And
Yeah.
the amazing thing about this to me now is, Hunt, it seems like science is catching up to religion in some of these ways. Both Christianity and Buddhism. Like when I think of Buddhism, I think of it in two different ways. I think of Buddhism as a scientific operating system for your mind. And then I also think of Buddhism as a quote religion or a theology. And I think you can separate those two. But a lot of the science is now catching up with things that Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism have been saying for thousands of years,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes, yes.
You talk about this anxiety that you didn't really realize how bad it was. I had an experience 5 or 6 years ago. I did a sensory deprivation tank, have you ever done one of those?
Mhm.
So for people that haven't done it, you're in a completely, you can't see anything. It's totally pitch black. You're floating in water that has enough salt or saline in it to where you actually don't have to use any effort to float on the surface. It's the same temperature as your skin. And so you can't feel, you can't hear, you can't see, and you don't talk. And so the only thing you're left with really is your mind. And Hunt, to your point about having this anxiety, the level of which you didn't realize it. I remember sitting in this tank and I would meditate for an hour there and having these realizations like 45 minutes in. Oh my gosh, the muscles in my forearm are so tight and have been and I didn't even notice it. Oh my gosh, I haven't really smiled in 2 or 3, like, weeks. I walk around, with I've been walking around with a little bit of frown on my face because I have these loops and I'm anxious about my kids and I'm thinking about the I need to smile more. And again, I think this is a good example, Hunt, of how unless we step back and pray or meditate or do psychedelics or do something self-reflective, oftentimes we just walk through life and we have no idea what's going on.
That's the unconscious. That's
Uh,
we're just unconscious. We're just moving
yeah,
through life like a zombie, and
yeah.
that's God knows I do it now. I mean, it's not like I'm some enlightened being. I do it
Me
now,
too, me too.
but the difference is I catch myself
Yeah.
mostly catch myself before I've spent 3 months walking around in a fog.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's spiritual practice. I mean, that's meditation gives you a chance to observe yourself in a
Yeah.
with some detachment, and that's psychedelics does that too. It really does. So
I used to whenever I would try a jury case as a lawyer, when I'm waiting for the jury to come back and make their decision, that is the worst, most anxiety, because all you're doing is you're sitting, "Oh, what are they doing? What are they thinking about? Are they gonna
why did I
lose?
say that? Why didn't I say this?
Oh my gosh, why did it take an hour? What are they doing in there? Oh, they ordered pizza. What does that mean?" A The last jury trial I had, which was a huge case, took a month in federal court in San Francisco. It was a full day of jury deliberation afterwards, and I sat there and just meditated the entire time. So as I was sitting I almost said church, as I was sitting in court, instead of thinking, what's going to happen? Am I going to win? Is my client going to be happy or sad? Or what are they? I just sat there and just watched my own thoughts the whole time. What a dramatically different experience
Right.
that
Yeah.
was, right?
Right. Yeah. Because sitting there worrying does nothing. It does
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
It just creates a whole story that's may or may not be true. That's most of it's not going to be true, but that's really good. Like that that'd be worth taking that show on the road to
I,
tell
I,
to your fellow attorneys. Here's
I'm telling you, it was amazing. And the thing about it is like, I actually had read this book, trying to remember what the name of the book was. It's like, it's not the Giving Up Project, but something like that. I'll think of it in a little bit. But anyway, the author's point was you should try to live in a meditative state all the time, which all that means is you should be conscious of your own consciousness and thought patterns as much as you possibly can. Like you said, all of us slip into the unconscious thought patterns and we slip into it all the time. but just doing it a little bit less, just a little bit less makes a profound difference in your conscious experience. Hunt, do you have time for, I have two more questions I'd like to
Sure,
ask.
yeah,
Okay. So for people that are listening to this show that are interested in, that are seekers, or my favorite term is seers, seers. People
Sure.
think of seers as like prophets. I think of seers as people that see clearly, people that want to see clearly, people that are seeking. What guidance do you have for them if they're exploring the intersection of their faith and psychedelics?
I think it's really important to have some spiritual practices that, I mean, we've talked a lot about meditation. I think that's really good. But, and there's other, if people just cannot imagine themselves sitting for 20 or 30 minutes, there's other journaling. People, please have a spiritual practice of some sort. Going to church is part of it, can be part of that, as long as it's, you're intentional about why you're going and not just checking off a thing once a week.
Staring at the mountains.
Yes,
As I was staring at the mountains for 20 minutes can be a spiritual
oh my God,
practice.
I live in Savannah, but I went up north this weekend. It was Memorial Day weekend. It was wanted to get out into the woods, and then so I spent an afternoon, at least at 2 hours, just looking deep, just looking into the woods. And
Yeah.
I had a book there that I'd pick up occasionally, but mostly I put the book down and just look. And what I noticed in those 2 hours, I noticed how many squirrels there were. I noticed how loud the birds were. I noticed that there was just things happening,
Yeah.
sounds and things that I wouldn't have seen had I been watching TV or even reading my book or talking to somebody. I was sitting on that deck by myself, just looking into the woods. And,
My Methodist preacher, not to interrupt you,
oh no,
but I want to say this. So 8 or 9 years ago, he gave this sermon, which I'll never forget, which basically was different people have different paths to God. So some people, you go to church and you're in the physical building. Some people prefer to be out there doing good works. Some people like to to be preachers themselves or go to theology school. Some people, the most religious experience is when they're in nature. And I remember when he said that, I said, "That's me."
yeah,
Like, I have a house in Colorado. Sometimes I'll sit in my backyard and look up in the sky, and I'll just see the birds, and then I'll see the chipmunks running around in the trees, and I'll realize that chipmunk is talking to that chipmunk, and that bird is looking at him,
yeah,
and then they're screaming at my dog, and I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, this is the most spiritual experience you could possibly imagine," right?
yeah. I've heard, yes, exactly, and that's why I've been trying to get back out in nature more than I used to. But I can't remember who it was. Some theologian said that nature was God's first scripture. That it's the creation is the place where we see God at work. And again, we've sort of, Western Christianity sort of removed us from that understanding that so much of Scripture is in nature, beginning with the Garden of Eden, but all the way through the Gospels, Jesus is out and picking things and talking about wheat and talking talking about
Yeah.
agricultural things and grapes and wineskins and just, I mean, yeah, and we've gotten ourselves detached from that, and that's caused a lot of problems that we're living in.
People should have some sort of baseline spiritual practice of some sort.
Yeah, so back, yes. So back
And
to,
then but they wanna see if they can integrate psychedelics into that experience. I interrupted you.
no,
You're
no,
fast.
I ran, no, you didn't, I
Yeah.
ran. So, I think I always say, "Don't be afraid, but very careful. Be careful."
Yeah.
If you do it, if and when you do it, when people do it, make sure it's with that you're not doing it without somebody that knows what they're doing, that has experience in facilitating this for people, especially the first few times, because these are powerful, and you don't want to be left unattended because
Yep.
you can wander off or hurt yourself. So somebody there to keep you safe. A small group's good as long as somebody's not using and just keeping everybody safe. Somebody knows what they're doing. There's some contraindications, mental health contraindications, physical health contraindications. So be aware of those and go, you don't have to go full in. You don't have to jump in with both feet right the first time. Uh, I think the main thing is to feel prepared and feel like you're with people that know what they're doing and be aware of the laws. These are Schedule 1, these are very illegal, except in Colorado and Oregon and New Mexico pretty soon, and clinical studies, and then Jamaica and the Netherlands.
Texas, depending on
Yeah,
what
Texas,
substance we're talking about.
yeah,
Like
but
Texas,
yeah,
Texas is literally banning CBD, which I don't really even want to get into a conversation about how stupid that is and what motivates that. But at the same time, thanks to former Governor Rick Perry and some former military guys,
yeah.
Texas is also allowing experiments with ibogaine and some other plant-based psychedelics to help people with PTSD and addiction problems and stuff. It's very strange what's going on in Texas.
Well, and look at how much we drink. I mean, there's all that, and then look at the most dangerous drug of all.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, we
Yeah.
do it. I mean, it's ubiquitous, and yeah, I mean, the most dangerous, really, literally, alcohol. If you
By
look
far.
if you look
By
at a
far.
chart, if you look at
Yeah.
a chart, and some pharmaceuticals, but if you just think of alcohol, alcohol's up here on the danger scale, and psilocybin is at the very bottom. And what
Yeah.
qualifies for danger psilocybin is some people have some lasting, mental health things, but typically they resolve. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just
Let's be honest. The reason that some of these substances are treated the way they are is because they're very powerful, very moneyed interests that
Mhm.
would have their financial interests harmed. For example, when I microdosed psilocybin, I immediately said, "This is the best antidepressant I
Mhm.
can possibly imagine." It's not like an SSRI where it kind of dulls everything and has all these very, very significant hormonal
Yeah.
effects.
It didn't really work. It didn't really work all that well. It didn't really work.
It doesn't work that well. Meanwhile, like a tiny little, tiny little dose of psilocybin gives you this feeling of calmness and contentment. You can function, and the colors are a little bit better, and your mind works better, and you can focus a little bit more. And I remember thinking, I don't blame Pfizer or whoever the pharmaceutical companies are, or the alcohol companies, for not wanting this stuff to be widespread, because if it was, they would lose billions and billions of dollars. So I kind of understand. I don't think it makes it right necessarily.
You're right.
But the motivations and the incentives. I mean, it's not an accident, for example, that our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, even though 70% of Texans support legalizing THC, it's not an accident that Governor Dan Patrick, who's leading the effort to literally get rid of CBD, is funded by the pharmaceutical, alcohol, private prison industries. I mean, there's a one-to-one connection
Oh
between
my
these
God.
two things. Yeah.
All those things, and throw in the prison, which is throw that in, which is really there was the Nixon administration motivation in the early 70s was really about politics and race, really.
It was about there are tapes with Nixon is talking, I think H.R. Haldeman, where he says, who's doing pot and who's doing psychedelics? It's the blacks and the hippies.
Yeah.
Literally, this is on tape. And the blacks and the hippies vote Democrat. So how can we get rid of the Democrats? We'll just make all of it illegal in one fell swoop. So what I tell people is, whatever you think about the war on drugs, it's not based on science. It's never been based on science. It's based on politics. Now, you can agree or disagree with the politics, but let's be honest about where it all started. And if
Yep.
you wanted to go back even farther than that, Hunt, right after Prohibition, Harry Anslinger, who was the head of what was then the DEA, said, "What are we going to do now? We don't have anything to do now that Prohibition's over. Oh, wait, the blacks and the Mexicans are using marijuana.
Exactly.
So we're going to literally plant fake stories in the newspapers to make people think that black people are raping white women and Mexicans are killing people because they're on weed or marijuana.
Yeah.
And we're going to create this Reefer Madness movie, which if you watch it nowadays, you're like stunned at how stupid people were to believe any of this stuff. But that's where it all started. And
Yeah.
again, you can agree or disagree on different things about the drug war, but one thing I don't think anybody can say is it was based on science. It's never been based on science. It's always been based on politics and racism
And economics.
and things like that. So,
That's right.
but the good thing is, like Dr. King said, the arc of, I think he said the arc of morality generally trends in the right direction. I'm paraphrasing that. I think the arc of this stuff is trending in the right direction, and I'm glad to see that. So,
I think so too. And I think I always tell what I say is people don't have to do. When I'm talking to Christians, I say, please be curious about the healing, because 70% of the people with a untreatable depression are getting relief after 2
yeah.
sessions of psilocybin. So veterans with PTSD, anybody with PTSD, let's don't we have a responsibility if we know something helps people. The other thing is,
How about a this is my own personal example. How about a mother of two who's dying of terminal breast cancer, and cannabis would give her a little bit of pain relief? Like, I think it's immoral
it's
not to
immoral.
give
It's
somebody. I
immoral.
think it's just straight up immoral not to give somebody. If it helps them and they're in those kind of situations, I think we should make that available to them
And we'll jack them up on morphine all day, every day.
all day. Yeah, all day.
So it's so that I hope that whatever he's doing in Texas, I just hope the 70% of the Texans who want legalized marijuana will. I don't know why we let this.
Well, it's a $50 billion industry, the hemp industry in Texas right now, or something like, and maybe it's 8 billion with 55,000 people involved in it. There are a lot of businesses that are going to get destroyed overnight because a radio shock jock who did not come from Texas happens to be our lieutenant governor, and it's very, very, very disappointing. But again, on the optimistic side, uh, in general, I think things are trending
I
in the
think
right
so.
direction. And this idea, oh, I don't do drugs. I don't do drugs. What about the cup of coffee you have every morning? What about the glass of wine you have at night? What about the sugar you have in that ice cream? It's all the same thing. It's just we have different kind of baggage based on, uh, you know, historical trends and different narratives and things like that. Well, Hunt, it's been an absolute joy. I knew this was going to be a great
It's flown
conversation.
by. Oh my God.
I can't. Yeah, I told you we didn't even. I said I'm going to go less than an hour, and I'm way more than an hour. But again, this is a super important conversation. It's a super positive conversation. I think one of the reasons this is important, Hunt, is because my sense, and maybe I'm just getting a little bit older, is there's a little bit of a crisis of meaning right now in our country. People are searching for things.
Yeah,
I actually see with the younger people a return towards religion, which I think is a very positive thing in
I
general.
agree. I agree.
And so I think this is important, and I think it's important that people talk about it, and particularly people like you, who a lot of people assume Episcopal priest is going to not be a proponent of psychedelics. I think it's important that people see people like you talking about this. So I really, really appreciate you coming on the show, Hunt.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Where can people support your mission?
well, we have a website. Ligare is the name of the organization. It's Latin. It's the Latin to unite or to bind. It's the root word of religion. Religion is religare. But so ligare.org, ligare.org. There's a lot of information in there about this intersection, this conversation. And then for those that are really interested, we have an opportunity to join a community where people are connecting in person and online, sharing resources. We provide spiritual care for people that are, we don't provide experiences, but we provide spiritual care for people that want to have an experience or have had an experience and want to figure out what it might mean through the lens of Christian theology and practice and spirituality. So ligare.org would be a great place to start. I think Michael Pollan's book is another good place to start. But if you're looking at the religious, so for the Christian conversation, Ligare, for the Jewish folks out there, there's an organization called Shefa, Shefa, shefaflow.org is another place. And there's a small Muslim conversation and organization starting too. So all coming out of the study that I was in at Johns Hopkins, the religious
Awesome.
professional study at Hopkins. So ligare.org. Thank you for letting me plug it.
Hunt Priest, thank you, man.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.